If you're listening to this, you probably love podcasts. Let me tell you about a new podcast I love called Remarkable Lives, Tragic Deaths. It takes a closer look at prominent figures who changed history and died tragically because sometimes it's not what you thought. Check out the lives and deaths of Alexander Hamilton, Harry Houdini, Kurt Cobain, and Amelia Earhart now, plus a new icon every Wednesday. So visit iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast directory and search for Remarkable Lives, Tragic Deaths, or visit Parcast, PARCAST.com/lives to listen now.
I'd like to thank our sponsor, Close 5, for supporting our podcast.
So Close 5 lets you buy and sell with other users nearby. You can make money fast by selling your used stuff. You turn your clutter into cash. It's hyper-local. You can find items near you. Buyers get to set the distance they want to browse in, so you only see items as far as you're willing to meet or pick up. Selling is also easy with Close 5. Take a photo of your item with the in-app camera and post the listing in seconds. You don't even need to add a title, a description, or a price unless you want to. Once you've sold the item, you choose a convenient public location to meet to exchange the item and get paid immediately. So download Close 5 for free in the Apple App Store or Google Play Store today.
All right, here I come. What's up? Andy in the house. I was taking my pills and my vitamins. You know, I got to stay strong. You know what I'm saying?
Many of you all probably know Leslie Jones is one of the comedians on Saturday Night Live. She's also one of the stars of the female version of Ghostbusters. And earlier this summer, she was eviscerated, really abused mercilessly on social media, particularly Twitter, with the most hateful, bigoted, disgusting comments. She really got a lot of attention because she stood up and she shared this with the world, which really kind of, I think, unveiled what a cesspool social media can be.
Have you experienced much hate speech yourself?
Oh, I've been swimming in that cesspool. Actually, you know, people don't really understand how it's like a sucker punch when people say that such mean, nasty, negative, ugly things about you, either about who you are, you know, your intelligence, your appearance. And I think under the cloak of anonymity, people feel emboldened to say all sorts of horrific things.
Well, and I've seen what people say about you online, and I know you, I'm your friend, and it's really upsetting because I know that 99% of it isn't true.
Thank you, Brian. And Thank you for your support.
You're welcome, anytime. And I think that anonymity, as you said, gives people an ability to say things that they never would dream of saying if they actually had to identify themselves.
Or to be face-to-face with somebody. We're going to talk with two people today who are on the front lines of this issue. First, Jonathan Weisman. He's an editor for the New York Times, and he quit Twitter over hate speech. And he did something very, very brave, which we'll tell you about in a moment. And we'll also be hearing from Richard Cohen, who's president of the Southern Poverty Law Center. Now, Richard's been mired in this stuff for decades. He'll tell us that for every big win against hate speech, there is inevitably a backlash. But there are still things that we can all do to fight these hateful words and deeds. I guess the question is, are technology companies doing as much as they could?
Well, it's a tough issue because you want people to be able to participate anonymously from places like Syria and Iran where they have no choice. But in this country, people are sort of abusing that privilege in order to be really nasty and inject a lot of poison into the public discourse.
Now, of course, I'm the target of some of this because I'm a public figure or whatever. But we wondered if other people experience it, even in their small circles, even among their followers on social media. So we decided to head out to Times Square, the center of the New York universe, of course, to find out what other people are experiencing online. And here's what we discovered. Hi, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Have you ever experienced hate speech or somebody being abusive to you on social media or online?
Yeah, political.
Yeah? How does it make you feel when you get those kinds of comments?
Like I don't want to be a part of it. I mean, I just ignore it, to be honest with you.
When you see it online directed at other people, what do you think?
in general, I don't like anybody that makes any adverse comments to people online because it goes to everybody, and I don't agree with that.
Let haters hate. Honestly, they're going to talk about whatever they want to talk about.
Are you shocked sometimes when you see the level of discourse online?
Well, I'm not shocked because that was what the internet was originally supposed to be, which was supposed to be an area where it's democratizing opinions and so forth. So, unfortunately, it matches up with the spectrum of the world.
I think there needs to be some boundary of, what's appropriate and what's not, right? You sort of teach kids and people what's appropriate and what's not, and you have to kind of practice it in real life, I think.
Have you ever experienced online bullying or hate?
Oh, you know you're
you
talking
asked the
to?
right person.
I'm the fitness director for Men's Health, so basically everything I post is he skipped leg day, his calves look terrible, I hate his face, I wish he would die.
Do you monitor your comments and do you ever remove them?
We often remove them. That's half my job. Scrolling through the Facebook feed.
Yeah, Facebook in particular.
Yeah, Facebook definitely.
So hate speech keeps you very busy.
It does. It keeps me employed. Yeah, definitely.
It's rough out there.
It is rough out there.
Yeah.
All right, stay safe out there.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
A big thank you to everyone willing to talk with us on a warm summer day in the middle of Times Square.
Very warm.
Now let's talk about Jonathan Weisman. Jonathan is a very fine writer for the New York Times, and he confronted really something that is so ugly that
many of us believed, probably incorrectly, had been put to bed a long time ago, which is just blatant anti-Semitism. So he's here to talk about that and what he did about it.
Hey, Jonathan Weisman.
Hi, Katie. How are you?
I'm good. Brian and I are really delighted that you're here to talk about what happened to you because I think it's emblematic of the times we're living in and how strange and surreal social media can be and how actually upsetting and dangerous it can be as well. Let's start from the beginning. This all happened when you posted an article about fascism. Tell us a little bit about why you posted it and what it was about.
You know, if something catches your fancy, you tend to tweet it out to your followers. It was something that I do several times a day. And Robert Kagan, kind of a neoconservative author, supporter of a lot of military interventions past, now at the Brookings Institution, he had written a piece for the Washington Post on how fascism is coming to the United States. And I tweeted it out to my followers, and I had gotten a response back that I'd never seen before. It was just simply my name in 3 parentheses from somebody who identified himself as Cyber Trump. And I tweeted back to him. I said, "Do you care to explain?" And that let loose this vituperative anti-Semitic rant. And he said, "I have belled the cat." And with the belling of that cat, the trolls, the neo-Nazis, the white supremacists started just deluging me with Holocaust imagery, Nazi iconography, really, really ugly stuff that I really thought was, things of the past.
Tell us, before I ask you a little bit more about some of the things that were tweeted at you, how this sort of 3 parentheses thing works and how it so-called bells the cat. Because I know that a lot of news organizations have since written about this.
Yeah, I of course knew nothing about this until I was sucked into it. It turns out that this group of neo-Nazis and white supremacists had come up with an actual piece of software, a Google Chrome plugin that you can download, and it puts these 3 parentheses around Jewish-sounding names, which allows them, if they have the right software, to search social networks for the 3 parentheses and then find targets to go after. Because oddly enough, most search engines don't look for things like parentheses and that kind of thing. They only look for numbers and letters and set things like the @ sign. So they had come up with an actual organized way to find and target certain people with Jewish-sounding names.
That's just unbelievable to me. How long has this been going on, by the way? Because I know it was recently discovered, but was this a practice that had been in effect for years even?
I don't think so. I think it's been several months, and I think the first targets were Jewish conservative writers and pundits, people like Bill Kristol, who had been targets of what they call the alt-right. And now it's moved to more mainstream journalists like myself.
I understand that Google Chrome was made aware of this, and then they got rid of the software that enables this process. Is that right?
That's right. It was labeled something very generic that you would never ever recognize as some kind of software targeted for anti-Semites. So they had no idea that it was there. And once they found out about it, they yanked it off.
What did it feel like when you first got those tweets that showed things like dead bodies in the Holocaust and other neo-Nazi symbols?
Yeah, I mean, the Holocaust, the concentration camp imagery is such a shock in this context because it turns your stomach. And the first time you see an image of like Donald Trump in Nazi garb flipping the switch on a gas chamber and your face inside that gas chamber, it's a shock. Now, the 10th time you see it, you start thinking, this is a joke. These people are just sick. And you start imagining them sitting in their parents' basement in their pajamas. The shock value does wear off. But, you know, the goading, the anti-Semitic goading, the constantly asking you, well, why are Jews always oppressed? Why are Jews always thrown out of these countries through the centuries? It's very, very frustrating.
And Trump is kind of a funny hero for these neo-Nazis because he hasn't made, to my knowledge, any anti-Semitic comments. He, in fact, has a Jewish daughter and son-in-law. His daughter converted when she got married. Why do you think he's become so celebrated and protected by these people online?
They, in his language on immigrants, they see a kindred spirit. They think that he's sending signals, that there's much more to it than he would like to say, but he can't say it because he's running for president. So Wolf Blitzer one time was talking to Donald Trump and brought up the anti-Semitic goading of journalists and asked him, what do you think about this? Will you repudiate that? And he basically said, I don't speak for my followers. I don't speak for all my voters. No, I think anti-Semitism is terrible. But he did not overtly repudiate them, did not say, I do not want your vote. I do not want your support. The way Ronald Reagan once did when the Klan had endorsed him.
Jonathan, one interesting thing that you did was you didn't mute these people. You didn't block them from your account. You actually retweeted so all of your followers could see what they were saying to you. Why did you want to do that?
Because if you just ignore them, it's hard for somebody to go onto your Twitter feed and see what you're seeing. If you retweet, then everybody who follows you sees it. At first, I would make little comments to make sure that nobody thought that I was, endorsing them by retweeting. Then I just started retweeting to create a record and to show anybody who wanted to see how ugly things were could just search for @Jonathan Weisman and find all sorts of evidence right there.
What was the reaction when you were retweeting? Because I was following your Twitter feed and I was looking at how some people were coming to your defense. Did you get much support from the journalistic community?
I've gotten a ton of support. And when I decided to write about it, it was actually then there was another a reporter for Haaretz, one of the Israeli newspapers. He's the one that came up with the idea that we should all put those triple parentheses around our names to show that we're not cowed, to show that we're not afraid, but also to thwart the software. And I thought that was an amazing moment of solidarity because now if you look on Twitter, you see a lot of people with these triple parentheses. So yes, I do feel supported and I do feel like I have accomplished something.
But you quit Twitter because you were upset with the reaction you got from the company. Tell us what transpired? Who did you call? What did they say? What were you hoping to achieve, and what didn't you get?
So as you said, Katie, I wanted to create this trail of anti-Semitism so people could see what they were doing. And I thought, I'll leave all this stuff out there for a little while, but I'm kind of growing sick of this. So I started reporting the most vicious anti-Semitic tweets coming at me to Twitter, because Twitter has something called the terms of service. When you sign on to Twitter, nobody ever reads them, but you click on something saying, okay, I understand the terms of service. And those terms of service say no harassment, no singling out people for ill treatment based on race, sexual orientation, religion, ethnic origin. You're vowing to follow Twitter's rules. So I started reporting them to Twitter, and at first, I would just get a little acknowledgement saying, we got your report. We're looking into it. We got your report. We're looking into it. Then one of the New York Times social media people, we have people who, were hired to look after our social media. She decided to take upon herself to put together a compendium of all the worst things that had come my way and send them in a package to Twitter. And then she got one of these notes back from Twitter saying, we've looked at what you've sent us and we see no violations of our terms of service.
What?
Which shocked me.
Honestly?
And then I remember her name is Ari. Ari sent me this, and I sent her a little frowny face back saying, this is ridiculous. The next morning I woke up and there was somebody.
I would have sent her something more than a frowny face, but you were very polite.
I was much more angry at Twitter than I was by this point at the neo-Nazis, because I'd kind of grown used to them. And I went onto Twitter. I said, this is a brief rant. And I said, I'm getting off Twitter because Twitter will not follow its own rules and will not police itself. And almost immediately, as soon as I did that, I started getting notes back saying, we've looked at this account and we've suspended it. We've looked at that account, we've suspended it. We've looked at some of the accounts and they said, we still don't see a violation of our terms of service. And I honestly, I went back and I could not figure out what criteria Twitter was using to decide that this guy's account is going to be suspended and this guy's account was fined. I honestly didn't see any difference between them.
What about this argument, the conundrum that some of these social media outlets ostensibly find themselves in, Jonathan, withdrawing the line between free speech and hate speech?
It's a question that I've gone over in my own head for a long time now, the last few weeks. And my attitude at this point is, if Twitter wants to make an announcement saying we're doing away with our terms of service, we don't care. We can have a Wild West. We're going to have open free speech. Say what you want. If they did that, I'd probably sign back up. At least they were being honest. What I find offensive is that Twitter can wear the halo of a terms of service that says we don't put up with harassment, we don't put up with racism or anti-Semitism or homophobia. We don't put up with these things, but then don't do anything to police it. So they have to make a decision. They are either one thing or another, but they can't have it both ways.
And the suspensions you talked about are meaningless because you're suspending the accounts, but not the people behind them. Those people can just set up additional hate spewing accounts. So what do you think Twitter actually ought to do to fix this problem, short of turning it into a Wild West?
It is a conundrum. It is very hard to puzzle out. And a lot of people have said, well, who cares? They're just a bunch of trolls. And my answer is, you're right. Who cares? Why do I need Twitter? So my attitude was, why, if I'm offended by the way Twitter is policing itself, then I will just say goodbye to Twitter for a while.
Did you hear from anyone like Jack Dorsey or any executives at Twitter after this whole brouhaha? Because I think it put them in a terrible light.
I've been expecting to hear from somebody, and I haven't. They've really been remarkably quiescent about this whole thing. They don't seem to want to engage.
What do you think this says about the state of our country? I wonder, did these people always exist? Are we just now seeing them because They have a platform. They can express their views. Is there something going on that the numbers are multiplying? What's your take on what this says about us as a country?
Well, and Katie, to jump in, I mean, the polling does show that deeply entrenched anti-Semitic views, at least according to the ADL's polling, have gone down from about 29% of Americans in 1964 to 12% in 2013, but it's still 12% of the American people. Anyway.
And that surprises me, frankly.
Surprises you that it's gone down?
No, it surprises me that it's at 12%. I mean, remember in Washington especially, where you see this bipartisan commitment to Israel and politicians of every conceivable stripe, from very liberal to very conservative, tumbling over each other to get to the right side of Jewish voters. I would never have thought it was 12%, frankly. I would have thought it was considerably lower. Now, but we've seen, if you look on a newspaper website, if the comment sections under articles allow anonymity, the tone of the discourse is horrific. It degenerates so quickly. But if you have to use a real name, it stays at a certain level. It's like road rage. If you don't have an identity, I don't know. I guess it's as old as Lord of the Flies or older than that. But I do think that the tone of this presidential campaign and the tone set by Donald Trump have empowered people to bring out views that they used to only speak, in the privacy of their own home around the angry dinner table or something. I mean, people seem willing to speak in public the way they used to never.
I mean, I get your point about Trump not being strong enough in condemning David Duke or anti-Semitic pronouncements, but are there elements of his campaign, of his platform, that you think are attracting white nationalists, anti-Semites, even though
white supremacists and
even though what he's saying 99.999% of the time is not anti-Semitic.
But I think if you call for a blanket ban on Muslim immigrants, if you call for a giant wall on the southern border, if you talk about Mexicans as rapists and thieves, I think you are sending a signal that exclusionary politics are now mainstream.
Do you think that, I know that a number of newspapers have done away with the comment section, or they're monitoring them more carefully, because if you look at them, it is so depressing to see how the discourse quickly devolves into basically a verbal fistfight between respondents, and the kind of vitriol and nastiness that is so pervasive. Then I read the letters to the editor in the New York Times, and I think, wow, my faith in America has been restored, because people have different opinions, but they're all sort of thoughtful and well-written, and it's like they're two Americas.
Well, it's, the Wall Street Journal did a great exercise where they created a blue Facebook and a red Facebook. And if you are a conservative, what you're tending to see on Facebook, and if you're a liberal, what you're tending to see on Facebook. And they made a very compelling illustration of how different and how divided the country is along political grounds. I mean, if you look on the New York Times comments now, they're curated. There are editors' picks, there are readers' picks. And so we empower certain readers to actually go through and select the best ones. You can click on, see all as well, but those are policed. I mean, we actually employ people to go through them.
So what's the solution, Jonathan? I mean, what have you learned from this whole bizarre and really upsetting experience?
I think that part of the solution is to not care so much about social media. Since writing off Twitter, I've been spending a lot more time actually reading whole articles off of the New York Times and the Washington Post apps, and not becoming almost like an automaton consulting my social media feed. I actually feel like it's been good to pull back from that world. And I think we could all do with a little less time on social media, right?
It makes you kind of narcissistic, don't you think? Because it makes you obsessed with what people are saying about you instead of looking outward and saying what you think is going on in the world. It's a weird inversion, isn't it?
I have teenage daughters, and they measure, their self-worth by their Instagram followings.
And their likes.
It's crazy. It's weird that they can quantify their popularity on social media, but I really wish they would just leave it alone,
Do you think, Jonathan, that there's a broader challenge for the mainstream press this election cycle when it seems like some reporters have cross the line from just covering the campaign to describing Trump and his candidacy and his supporters in ways that might have seemed too much like advocacy for the other side or against one side? Do you think that the mainstream press reinforces this narrative of a liberal bias based on the way some are covering Donald Trump?
I think I and a lot of journalists involved in watching this campaign are wrestling with this because on the one hand, we have an obligation to fact check and to cover any candidate with a jaundiced eye, with a sense that they can't just get away with the big lie, saying something over and over until we all accept it. It's our responsibility to point out when something is just factually inaccurate, untrue. I think that, famously the Huffington Post declared that they weren't going to cover Donald Trump as a true candidate. They were going to relegate him to the entertainment section. And I remember arguing at that point, we need to cover Donald Trump like we would cover any other candidate. We need to scrutinize his policy proposals. It's very difficult. I do think that reporters, I think in this campaign, are faced with a candidate that is unprecedented. That we have ways that we cover candidates. There's a rhythm of a campaign, but with Trump, much of that rhythm has just been thrown off because he's not running what most people would call a campaign. There's no yard signs. There is no advertising. We actually do have to rethink the way we cover a presidential campaign when the candidate himself is not behaving like a candidate.
Not only not behaving like a candidate, but of course, Walter Cronkite had that famous moment when he spoke out against the Vietnam War. When do you have a moral imperative to speak out against something that seems so contrary to the principles upon which this country was founded?
It took Walter Cronkite a long time to get to that point, right? So I think that a lot of people might say that a blanket ban on Muslim immigrants already crossed that line. But I think that you can point out where Trump or Clinton have gone through the lines of what is constitutional and what is democratic without necessarily denouncing them. One of the Times reporters, he's our Supreme Court reporter, wrote a story about all of the ways that Trump's proposals are anti-democratic and anti-constitutional. And in so doing, he spoke only to conservative constitutional scholars. He didn't speak to one liberal in the entire story. And that story was incredibly widely read. It was extremely successful in getting its message out. But I don't think anybody would read that as, a Walter Cronkite cri de coeur. It was just Adam Liptak going through the proposals and measuring them up against what we know to be the tenets of the Bill of Rights.
But of course, Lyndon Johnson said famously, if we lost Walter Cronkite, we've lost the war. And today, does any institution have sort of the moral heft to be able to say something and have it really affect public opinion? Because so far, it doesn't seem to.
I actually think it would have to be kind of a truth power moment where a conservative came out against Trump. But then again, so many conservatives have.
I was going to say Bill Kristol, hello.
No, I mean, well, that Robert Kagan story that came out, and Max Boot. In fact, some of the most eloquent writing against Trumpism has come from conservatives. All those have done is show just how far apart the Republican power structure, the Republican intelligentsia is from so much of the Republican base. What we have seen is people that we used to routinely call up to get a sense of where are conservatives these days. We found out that they have no influence whatsoever.
And I would argue it's not just the Republican base, it's this new base of populism that we've seen bubbling up throughout this campaign.
What we learned in the rise of Donald Trump is that there is a whole new quadrant. It's the socially conservative, economically liberal voter, the person who feels like a white working class is besieged and they don't want special treatment going to gays and African Americans and Latinos, but they do want their Social Security and they do want their Medicare and they don't particularly, want government to shrivel up and die. So it is the populist quadrant, the social conservative, economic liberal, that Donald Trump's candidacy has unearthed.
When Make America Great Again is fundamentally a nostalgic, backward-looking sort of message. Let's take America back to when it was last great. And presumably that means when there were, when the demographics were different, when the economy was different.
A friend of mine said when he sees that on a baseball hat, he sees Make America White Again.
Well, when Donald Trump sat down with one of the Times' diplomatic reporters, foreign policy reporters, David Sanger, and David Sanger mentioned, so you would say that your policies are kind of America first. And he said, yes, yes. And now ever since then, that interview, he's been using the term America first. Never once has he Googled America first to understand the historic context. We still have no evidence that he understands Charles Lindbergh and the America First Committee that tried to keep the United States out of World War II. He seems to be ahistoric in his sloganeering, at least.
Well, in a sense, that may be the most anti-Semitic thing he ever says.
Exactly, it is. But I'm not sure if he has any idea the anti-Semitic undertones of America First.
Well, fascinating conversation. Jonathan Weisman, I guess I won't see you on Twitter, but I'll see you on Facebook, right?
That's right. I am on Facebook.
Thanks so much for talking with us. It's upsetting, but a really important conversation. So thanks so much, Jonathan.
Well, thank you for having me.
So after we recorded this interview, we were surprised to see Jonathan Weisman start tweeting again. We asked him about his change of heart, and he told us that a recent piece about the Iran nuclear deal in the Wall Street Journal had him itching to communicate online with other journalists. And Facebook just wasn't doing the trick. He wrote to us that Twitter in Washington is much more of a conversation between journalists, and that was the audience he was seeking. His one tweet about the Iran deal got 186,000 impressions and reminded him that Twitter is still a powerful medium of communication. And also, to his surprise, he says that his Twitter bullies had nothing to say. He's tried to be more judicious in his use of Twitter, he told us, but he still hasn't heard anything from the higher-ups at Twitter about what he went through. Jonathan said Twitter can root out hate speech, but it chooses not to. Also, don't forget to pick up a copy of Jonathan Weisman's excellent novel, Number 4, Imperial Lane, which comes out in paperback in January.
How big is this problem? Is it simply an isolated incident, a pack of anti-Semites getting a hold of one person on social media, or is it widespread? And what other kind of bigotry is being unleashed online? We're going to talk about that coming up. Thank you very much, all the nice folks at Casper Mattresses, for sponsoring our podcast.
Casper is a sleep brand that created one perfect mattress sold directly to consumers. Eliminating commission-driven, inflated prices, its award-winning sleep surface was developed in-house, has a sleek design, and is delivered in a small, how did they do that sized box? I didn't realize that was the size of box. In addition to the mattress, Casper also offers an adaptive pillow and soft, breathable sheets.
There's nothing like breathable sheets.
I need a breathable sheet. It combines springy latex and supportive memory foams for a sleep surface that's got just the right sink and just the right bounce. Plus, its breathable design sleeps cool to help you regulate your temperature through the night. Mattresses can often cost well over $1,500, but Casper mattresses cost $500 for a twin-size mattress, $600 for a twin XL, $750 for a full, $850 for a queen, and $950 for a king. Buying a Casper mattress is completely risk-free. Casper offers free delivery and free returns with a 100-night home trial. So if you don't love it, they'll pick it up and refund you everything.
By the way, Casper mattresses made in the US of A.
And Time Magazine named it one of the best inventions of 2015.
Wow.
There's a special offer to listeners just of our show. You can get $50 toward any mattress purchase by visiting
www.casper.com/COURIC.
Couric, and using offer code
COURIC.
Couric. Terms and conditions apply.
Everyone's going to know how to spell my name now.
It's very exciting.
And we'd like to thank The Great Courses for supporting our podcast.
So many of us are constant learners, or at least we want to be, and gain knowledge just for the pure pleasure of it. That's what the Great Courses Plus is all about. It's the perfect way to satisfy the desire to keep learning. The Great Courses Plus gives you unlimited on-demand access to a wealth of knowledge. They have over 7,000 engaging video lectures presented by award-winning professors. You can dive deeper into topics like history, business, economics, explore new interests like cooking or speaking Spanish. You can watch these lectures anytime, anywhere, from any device. We want you to sign up so you can start watching courses like
The Fundamentals of Photography. Actually, I would love to take this class. It was created in partnership with Nat Geo and presented by professional photographer Joel Sartor. And it gives you all kinds of techniques so you can be more creative and take professional quality pictures. So sign me up.
And right now, as one of our podcast listeners, you'll immediately get a free month of unlimited access to all of the Great Courses Plus lectures when you sign up. So start your free month today. Sign up now at thegreatcoursesplus.com/Katie. That's thegreatcoursesplus.com/KATIE.
By the way, if anybody out there is wondering who this disembodied voice is, this guy named Brian Goldsmith, let me explain briefly. Brian and I have known each other for a very long time. Gosh, maybe 10 or 15 years, Brian?
I started working for you in 2004 as a summer intern on the Today Show.
Wow. Brian, by the way, is only 34 years old. But the reason why he's here is he's got one of the sharpest political minds I know. Plus, I happen to find him really amusing sometimes.
You and 3 or 4 other people.
Yeah. And so that's why he is my Ed McMahon. Can you do an Ed McMahon laugh?
Ha, 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 ha. No, not so good.
I think you need to go home and work on that.
I hadn't practiced my Ed McMahon laugh. Boy, it sounded almost as genuine as the real Ed McMahon laugh. If we were Ed McMahon and Johnny, we would go out and have like 10 martinis after this each.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. Now, let's get back to the show.
Obviously, this story about Jonathan Weisman is so upsetting, and we wanted to get a broader perspective on what's happening vis-a-vis anti-Semitism and social media, and also just around the country and around the world. So Richard Cohen is president of the Southern Poverty Law Center in Montgomery, Alabama. Hey, Richard, thanks so much for talking with us.
Sure, Katie.
Hey, Richard, it's Brian. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of the Southern Poverty Law Center, but may not want to admit that they don't know what it actually does or why it exists. Can you share a little bit about the history of that organization and what you do today?
Appreciate the opportunity to. You know, the Southern Poverty Law Center was founded in 1971, 45 years ago, really to make the promise of the newly enacted civil rights laws, the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 a reality in the Deep South. Nowadays, kind of organizational motto is fighting hate, teaching tolerance, and seeking justice. The project that monitors white supremacist activity, that's kind of our arm that fights hate. Right now, we focus primarily on issues of recent immigrants, the rights of children. We have a lot of work trying to push back against the problems of mass incarceration, really the full gamut of civil rights issues.
Richard, was there an aha moment when you said, this is my calling, this is what I want to dedicate my life to?
When I was a junior in high school, way back when, my civics teacher, challenged me. He made me read and brief Supreme Court cases. This was in the 11th grade.
What year was that?
Oh, killing me, Katie. Stop it. Stop it, girl.
I think I'm probably older than you are, Richard.
No. I'm 61, so that would have been in 1971, 72.
So really sort of a very tumultuous time in our nation's history.
And I mentioned one other thing, too. The first convention that I watched was the 1968 convention. I was 13 years old. And of course, that was the convention where the police are rioting and the expression whole world of watching. And, I was mesmerized by it, even as a little kid. And, one of the things that stood out, or the person who stood out the most for me, was Julian Bond, who really came to national attention then. And you might remember, although he was too young, his name was placed into nomination, in the Supreme Court, for the vice presidency. And of course, Julian was the first president of the Southern Poverty Law Center. I think about those days when I was 13 years old and think about it today. And of course, I think about Julian's legacy. He was such a close friend, and we lost him last year. I suppose that was 1968 was as much an aha moment for me as anything else.
Do you have any trouble attracting?
Wait. I want to know if Katie's older than me.
I'm 2 years younger.
Katie.
I'm 2 years younger, Richard.
I knew it. You're killing me.
Hey, listen, I would have dated you in high school. You would have been a senior when I was a sophomore. What can I say?
Yeah,
you're a sweetheart.
I think that's probably a lie, but we'll move on.
Why?
You were a cheerleader in high school?
Why? Yeah. What does that say? Is that an indictment of me or Richard? No, because Richard went to Columbia. First of all, I like smart guys. He went to Columbia and he went to UVA Law School. So wahoo wah, Richard.
Okay, exactly. Yeah, I'm sure she would have dated you in high school. Do you have any trouble attracting really smart, ambitious lawyers to Montgomery, Alabama, and work for the Southern Poverty Law Center?
We're lucky. There are a lot of people who have a lot of passion, who go to great schools and want to join our cause. So, we don't have a hard time recruiting people. Sometimes we have a hard time keeping them for very long, just because they want to move to a big city. But, we've been incredibly lucky to be able to draw, talent to our cause. And, we don't have any secret formulas at the Southern Poverty Law Center. We don't have any patents or copyrights. All we have is, talented and passionate people. It's really what's sustained us for 45 years.
I guess you sometimes wish business weren't so good, right? In terms of the kind of things that you're dealing with.
Yeah, we've seen a real explosion of extremism in recent years. And, unfortunately, the rhetoric surrounding, this year's presidential campaign has amplified it.
Brian Goldsmith is here. I know that you all have talked on the phone together, and we both talked to Jonathan Weisman. What did you make of the whole Jonathan Weisman Twitter story?
Well, it's an example of the fact that so much on Twitter is like a drive-by shooting. There are very, very few barriers to entry to get a Twitter account. It's not no real systems of verification and whatnot. And so that anonymity breeds, ugly conduct.
Why do you think Twitter doesn't follow its own terms of service on hate speech?
Look, we have a lot of experience with the digital industry, and, they like to pay lip service to their terms of service. Oh, we're opposed to hate. Oh, we don't like misogyny. But the reality is that, it's a pain in the butt for them to enforce those terms.
Well, when you've talked to executives at Twitter, or if you reached out to various social media platforms, Are they embarrassed? What's their explanation for not policing it?
I think they have no good explanation for it. Sometimes it takes, the media to expose them. We one time wrote a story about iTunes that caught their attention and led them to pull all of their hate music off their site, which was really important. I commend, Tim Cook for doing that.
I know that you use the term hate speech or hate music. How do we define what that means? What's protected but offensive speech under the First Amendment, and what crosses the line to a point where the content should be removed?
Well, look, none of the speech that we're talking about is illegal. But of course, these are private companies. They can remove speech that they find offensive if they want to. It's not like the government doing it that would amount to censorship. So we're not talking about illegal speech. We're talking about ugly speech, offensive speech that violates the terms of service of these organizations. And typically the kind of speech that we're talking about is that which, vilifies someone for their race, their religion, their sexual orientation or not, or vilifies entire groups. So again, it's not a question of whether the speech is illegal, because it's not. The question is it ugly enough to violate the terms of service of these private organizations?
But it sounds like you are making some progress, that you are exposing some of this hateful behavior or speech or the use of these platforms to the companies that oversee them or own them, and they've been fairly responsive, except for Twitter?
Well, Twitter hasn't moved as quickly as some of the others. Most of these, high-tech companies are run by liberal-minded people. And, if you can get their attention, you can make progress. We've gone to the Silicon Valley and met with people from Google, from Amazon, from PayPal. And, we're making some progress there, but you got to get on their radar. These are big, giant companies, and, this is oftentimes not a high priority for them.
Tell us about a personal experience you've had where you have been so discouraged or hurt or depressed about language or a situation that you've witnessed and wanted to fix.
Katie, to be honest, with me, sometimes it's a little bit like blood on the operating room floor. Sometimes I hear so much hate speech that I don't want to say I'm used to it, but I guess what I would say is nothing particularly shocks me at this point, unfortunately.
Let me ask you about the role, Richard, of social media in kind of empowering or fueling this kind of hate speech or these kinds of organizations or movements. I know that Stormfront, which is a leading neo-Nazi portal, had 140,000 registered members in 2008, and now it has over 300,000. I mean, what role does social media have in expanding the numbers and the intensity of some of these individuals?
I think it has multiple roles. First, it makes it easier to find kindred souls. Second, the people you're talking to, most of them share your views, and, you get encouragement, you get validation. And I think that, kind of ramps up the intensity. Some of these people eventually get frustrated, and enough talk and act out. Dylan Roof was an example of that. In his manifesto, he said, someone needs to take action. I guess it's me. And, so that was the final step.
Who are these people? Do they feel disenfranchised, alienated? Are they workers who have been sort of laid off? I mean, is there a common thread among some of these people in terms of what's binding them together other than just hate and intolerance?
Well, I think that most of the people in the white supremacist movement, most of the people who are foot soldiers at least, tend to come from somewhat marginalized backgrounds. They look for reasons perhaps outside of themselves to explain their failures. and they, glom onto a powerful narrative. Here you are, you're Dylan Roof. You're an, unemployed kid with no future. You can think about that, or you can suddenly decide that you're a warrior for the white race and you're going to strike a blow for freedom. I think that some of the people who are attracted in this country to the siren song of ISIS are in the same position. There's, kind of a lack of, they're searching for an identity, and suddenly they're offered one by this seemingly invincible, powerful, group that is going to, change their lives and give it meaning.
You said earlier that you thought extremism has exploded and hate speech is on the rise. Is that just because technology and access to technology is more widely available, or do you think that says something deeper about our society and the direction that we're moving in?
I think it says something about global trends, really. What we've seen over the past decade has been, the increasing diversity of the United States. We've seen the same thing in Europe, increased immigration. And our country has had a backlash to that. President Obama, in many ways, is the symbol of the country's changing diversity, but he's also been, kind of a ferocious target of its backlash. Also, I would say in the past, half dozen years at least, past 7 or 8 years, the dislocations in the economy caused by globalization, the worldwide recession, has pushed people to look for answers and has increased stereotyping. So I think we're looking at some real global trends, some macro trends, and and those things are exacerbated, by the ease of communications that exist in the modern world.
So you see it happening all over Europe, obviously, and here in the United States, I think possibly exacerbated or probably exacerbated by Donald Trump's candidacy. Have you seen a correlation between his popularity and the amount of hate speech that you're seeing, either online or in other forms?
Absolutely. First, usually in the white supremacist world, they don't get involved in politics. It's like a pox on both their homes. Both parties are irredeemably corrupt. Trump, on the other hand, hasn't been embraced by the white supremacists. People like David Duke have called him, the glorious leader. So, we're having that, suddenly he's their champion. Another thing, we did a survey, Katie, of, our schools around the country, teachers around the country. We have a program that provides free educational resources to every school in the nation. We asked the teachers, what impact has the election had in your school? More than half the teachers, I think 2,000 of them, responded and talked about, Mr. Trump, talked about how there'd been an increase in bullying in their classroom, an increase in kind of ugly rhetoric, kids who were scared, kids who thought they would be deported. One of the things most depressing to me, and this was depressing, I would say, a teacher wrote us and said, look, when people said stuff in the past, when my kids in the past said things that were out of line, they were off color, I'd rebuke them and they'd shut up. Now, when they say things, they ask me, hey, why can't I say that? The future president of the United States is saying that.
Wow. When you told me sort of the raison d'etre of the Southern Poverty Law Center to make sure the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act were implemented and followed, I couldn't help but wonder, Richard, where we are now compared to back then. Because as you know, the Voting Rights Act has been rolled back in certain ways, and it seems like the race relations in this country are as fraught as ever. So when you look back at from 1971 to 2016 at the trajectory of these things, what do you come up with?
Well, it's remarkable, frankly, how much progress the country has made since those days. And it's depressing also that we seem so often, especially in recent years, to be taking a giant step backwards. The fight for justice is one that every generation has to wage. It's it's nothing. It's not anything where people of goodwill can rest on their laurels. There are always new battles to fight, and there are always forces that are trying to hold us back.
Let me ask you, you gave us some very depressing sort of statistics and trends. So what do you do about this? What do you do about the increase in hate speech? How do you counter it? I know that the State Department has a whole countering violent extremism department to try to come up with alternative narratives for people online. But how do you nip this in the bud?
I mean, look, it takes a full court press, right? You have to, it takes, work by people in schools, people in churches, community leaders, our political leaders. There's not one magic bullet. For us, again, it's, reflected in our organizational motto. We try to expose the people who have hate in their heart. I think that some of the things I'm talking about are Pollyannish, but we're people who have hope and people who believe that, as Dr. King said, the moral arc of the universe may be long, but it bends towards justice. That doesn't mean that justice is inevitable. That doesn't mean that it's going to happen without our efforts. But I think you have to have hope in order to continue this kind of struggle.
Richard Cohen, thanks so much for talking with us, and thank you for the great work that all of you do at the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Thank you, Katie.
It's so nice to end such a depressing topic on a positive note, because I do think people are basically good and kind. They're just some bad apples that give us all a bad name.
Thanks to the whole team at Earwolf, including Chris Bannon, Greta Cohn, and the Reverend John Delore for helping to produce our show. Thanks to Mark Phillips for our theme music. And thank you for listening. So maybe you think we're kidding when we say we want you to leave a message and tell us what you think about the show. We're actually not kidding. Katie has me here chained to the old-fashioned 1988-style answering machine. So it would just make my life a lot better if you would call and leave a message at
929-224-4637.
And let us know what you think about anything you've heard on the show, anything you want us to talk about, questions for Katie, really anything you want to talk about at all. So give us a call, again, 929-224-4637. And also, please subscribe, rate, and review the show. Number one, it helps us to learn what you think. And number two, it helps other listeners find the show.
If it helps to make fun of my calves so you can get through the day and it's a tough day, I'll be that for you today. I know you're a good person. And the other thing it does, too, is it makes you want to train a little bit harder. So I don't skip leg day, even though they think I do.
I'm Trayvon Free.
I'm Mike Drucker.
You are now in the room where it's happening.
Where we geek out about the best musical of all time.
Hamilton.
Hamilton.
We'll be talking about the lyrics, the history, the production, and we've got some amazing guests. We have actress Kristen Chenoweth.
I'm rooting for you, and I'm sorry you shot him.
Comedian John Hodgman.
I ran home, and I said to my wife and 2 children, you have to listen to this.
Hamilton cast member Jasmine Cephas Jones.
Yo, this is amazing.
Subscribe right now, and you'll never miss an episode. Join us in the room where it's happening.
Everybody!
That's amazing.
This has been an Earwolf production, executive produced by Scott Aukerman and Chris Bannon. For more information and content, visit earwolf.com.